Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 94 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. I am one half of your co-host here, Sean, with my other co-host, Sam. Sam, how are you?
I'm doing well, Sean. I'm ready to discuss episode 4 in the Rings of Power season 2. I have to say before we get started, it's getting better.
This episode in particular, yes, did get better. Episode 5, I think, also got even more better. Is that a
More
phrase?
more betterer.
Yeah.
I would agree. I've watched it now just once. I'm going to watch it again before we discuss it, but things are overall in an upward trajectory. I think we still have some issues, but they are no longer as significant or game breaking. At this point, they are moving into the territory of annoying. So we'll get into all that detail. But we're going to discuss episode 4, and here is your plot summary. Elrond and Galadriel set out for Eregion with a company of elves. They come to a bridge that has been destroyed by lightning and are forced to take a different path. Galadriel receives a vision from her ring of power that danger lies on their new path and believes this to be a trap set by Sauron. Elrond dismisses the ring's warning. Separated from his Harfoot companions, the stranger comes across a mysterious man who introduces himself as Tom Bombadil. After rescuing the stranger from being consumed by a tree, Tom explains that he is Eldest and remembers a time before there were stars. He came to Room to see what had become of the once beautiful land, which is now a wasteland ruled over by the Dark Wizard. Tom explains that the stranger has been tasked with stopping both the Dark Wizard and Sauron. Nori Brandyfoot and Poppy Proudfellow meet a community of halflings called Stoors who live in a desert canyon. Gundabale Earthhauler, the leader of the Stoors, plans to turn them away due to them being hunted by the Dark Wizard. She realizes that the Harfoots are descended from a Stoor who left in search of the Suzat, a place of green hills that he dreamed could be the home of halflings. Two of the Dark Wizard's Godrim riders come searching for the Harfoots and are turned away by Gundabale. Deduces that Estrid is one of the wild men. She earns back Isildur's trust when he and Arondir are sucked into a mud pit inhabited by a nameless creature, and she helps free them. They are confronted by two Ents who captured Theo and the wild men in retribution for the felling of trees by wild men and by Adar's orc army. Arondir promises to protect the forest and the Ents free their prisoners. One of the wild men is Hagen, Estrid's betrothed. Arondir leaves Theo in charge of Pelargir and follows the orcs' trail. After fighting the Barrow wights, spirits inhabiting the corpses of long-dead humans, the elves find Adar's army, and one of their group, Camnir, is hit by an arrow. He is healed by Galadriel's ring. She gives the ring to Elrond and tells him to return to Lindon to warn High King Gil-galad. Galadriel stays to hold off the orcs and is captured by Adar. All right, Sean, we both have more positive impressions of this episode. What were some of your highlights?
Well, I just realized I have a super bad low light right here that I
Oh no.
completely forgot about
Oh
until
no.
you just read that recap. Pelargir already existed.
Yeah.
Who the hell is Arondir to leave Theo in charge of Pelargir? When he
Oh
calls
yeah.
him Lord of Pelargir, it's like, what
Yes.
the fuck was that?
Yeah. So I had a very similar reaction, and I this is something that we could complain about it every episode, and I don't want to be redundant, but it is one of those issues that continues to hold the show back, which is just stupid lines of dialogue don't make any sense and actually set up problems. Like, are we to think that one Arondir was given authority to name the Lord of Pelargir by the other people? They obviously deferred to him, but that seemed to be more of like a he's the most capable person here, not like we trust you with determining our entire community's future and empower you to elevate a fucking kid into the Lord of Pelargir. I mean, you know what I think is they're setting him up to be a Nazgul again. And this goes back to season 1 where he's going to be he's a conflicted character. There's a draw to evil. He's got anger issues. He's orphaned, but now he's elevated to power. It could not happen, but I could see that being kind of the
Yeah, I'd be
direction.
pissed off if it happened because he's not a king of men. He's some random little bastard from the Southlands who
Hey, hey, hey. I
has
think
just been put in charge of a Numenorian settlement that has been around for potentially hundreds, if not thousands of years. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that is pretty stupid.
Uh, there were other little stupid lines of dialogue that jumped out in the scene, and they continued. I mean, we were supposed to start off with what we liked about the episode, so we'll come
Well, let's
back to
just
the.
quick get the negatives out of the way.
All right, there we go. Yeah, that's fine. Continuing on the tradition of the dumb dialogue, the the scene with the mud pit monster. After that is resolved, I think Isildur says, "What was that?" And Arondir says, "There are fouler things than in the deep places of the earth." It basically the exact line that I believe Gandalf
From
had in
Gandalf.
describing the Watcher in the water, which it doesn't make any like. Why would he say that? That doesn't make any sense. But there's so many other different things that you can say. In fact, it would have been great to tie it into the seeming influence that Sauron has in the world, where we've got this hints at magical climate change in Rune. We've got the aftershocks of Mount Doom causing significant earthquakes in Khazad Dûm. We've got the seemingly the in this episode somehow these Barrow wights have woken up after 1,000 years and are malicious. And so it could be something like, there's great evil is now stirring and it's, coming to the surface or something like that. It doesn't need to be a line that you stole from a movie that made sense in the context of that scene in the movie, but doesn't make any sense here because it's a mud pit in the middle of a forest near the ocean. It's just, it was very
There's no
frustrating.
there's no deep crevasse that this thing came out
Yes,
of.
yes. There's it didn't make any sense. And it's these little things that kind of take me out of enjoying the episode because it's just such a stark contrast with other material and it doesn't fit. Anyway, that was my nit there. What else?
The next thing I didn't like was Tom Bombadil being in Rune. And we'll get to one of the things I like, but I really like Tom Bombadil, and I think his portrayal in this show is pretty fantastic. The one thing I don't like is the rationale as to why he is in the middle of the desert in Rune.
Yep.
He basically says, I heard rumors that this green, lush land was turned to sand, so I had to come see it for myself. It makes no
Tom
sense.
Bombadil doesn't do that. He
Hangs out at the Withywindle and he does his thing there. And they've established in the books that he specifically has way more sway over that particular plot of land that surrounds his dwelling.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they just have him in the middle of Rune for no reason other than they wanted to use him in this story in Rune. And then it makes even less sense when you have an interaction later between him and the stranger where Bombadil says, yes, the Dark Wizard also came to me the same way you are now, looking to talk about how to harness magic, how to control magic, how to wield a staff, all of these things. When did the Dark Wizard interact with Tom Bombadil?
Yep.
At the Withywindle? Because he basically makes it seem that the Dark Wizard is the one who has turned Rune into this sandy, desolate, evil place. And he's there to inspect that. So when did he talk to the Dark Wizard? So that's an inconsistency that really bothered me. But for the most part, like that character that they've written of Tom Bombadil, I really do like. I think he's written very well. The lines that they've stolen, quote unquote, stolen from the Fellowship of the Ring, I don't have any problems with because there's a lot of times when they first are introduced, Bombadil is saying a lot of the lines that are directly taken from the Fellowship of the Ring when the hobbits get to the Withywindle.
Mm.
But we've never seen that in film before. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel like they're stealing it from Peter Jackson's trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels like, yeah, this is something that this character would say.
Yeah.
The character is acted really well, was portrayed really well. And yeah, I'm very happy with Tom Bombadil at this point.
Yeah, it would just be better if it weren't in Rune. And if it weren't set up with him exploring the causes of this climactic shift. But we'll see how things develop. on that front. I was also a fan of the portrayal. I thought his little setup was pretty cool with his kind of hidden valley. There's a lot of these like little hidden valleys, right? We got the Bombadil area, we got the Stewards little canyon.
He was wearing yellow boots, and at one point, you see his blue jacket hanging on a
Mm-hmm.
coat rack in the back. So, straight from the books, he's wearing the clothing of Tom Bombadil, which was cool to see.
Mm-hmm. A little
Singing,
sing-songy,
yep, sing songs, yep.
but it's not hokey. I mean, the Tom Bombadil character can be very hokey. Those songs are a little goofy, and they did a good job of keeping it serious as befits the tone of the show generally. All right, what else do we want to continue talking about? Some shortfalls, or we want to talk about some highlights? Because there were a lot of highlights in this episode, a lot of interesting stuff, good stuff.
Yeah, we can keep doing positives.
Okay, where should we start?
Just pick one, man.
All right, well, I'm looking at our notes and I'm realizing that most of our notes are skewing negative, but I think that was because most of our notes are overall, I think they are doing. I continue to be impressed with how the show looks, and the pieces of the plot are starting to come back together. Right? We have the orc army moving from Mordor into Eregion. We have now Arondir moving into Eregion. I don't necessarily know what Isildur and Estrid and the rest of Theo and them are going to do. I wonder if we're going to get him back to. I will say that the only downside is that we haven't had time to really appreciate things that are happening in Pelargir, right? I wanted to know more about the dynamics down there. What they gave us was interesting. I think the show is doing a good job of being more interesting, but not going into the depth that I would like it to. I'm struggling here a little bit because the show gave me a good impression, but now when I'm being challenged to tell you exactly why, it's a little bit harder. So help me out here. Tell me why.
I liked seeing an Entwife. I
Okay.
thought the portrayal of the Ents was pretty cool. I mean, to back up your Pelargir issue, I do think they really brushed over the town and the village of Pelargir. Everything we've seen is like a quick little snapshot by the water reservoir and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We saw from a distance the town of Pelargir, but we haven't really explored the city itself. And having like Isildur give us the background and the history of Pelargir a little bit more in a conversation with somebody would have been better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think from the Southlands and that area, I do really like that we finally got to see an Entwife, and I liked the portrayal of having blossomed flowers all
Mm-hmm.
over,
Mm-hmm.
which was pretty cool. You, I think, have a different take on this. I actually liked the Barrow Wight scene and the portrayal of the Barrow Wights.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about it because it's not that I didn't like it. It's just I thought I have an overarching complaint about the way that they do action scenes, which is parts of it are nitpicky, but I think parts of it are legitimate. And then I think there's also just missed opportunities, right? And they stray too much toward hey, wasn't it cool when in the book the hobbits were attacked by the Barrow-wights? Let's do that, but multiply it by 5 and make it more about the action. Where, I mean, you pointed out in our discussion is that that conflict is resolved because Elrond remembers a bit of lore.
But therein lies the cool thing about that scene for me.
Right,
Is like Elrond, the lore master, like in that high stress moment, he's able to like calm things down where you have hothead Galadriel and all of these other elves that just are quick to attack. You have Elrond, who is a much wiser, and then that's like that positive portrayal for me of a wise elf. Elrond takes the moment to think about, oh, how can we actually defeat these things? I mean, you have issues with them just running into battle and another elf is killed even after Galadriel said, I'm here because I want to stop the death. of other elves. Those are all issues with Galadriel and Galadriel's writing.
Okay, so
But I think in this scene in particular, I thought the Barrow wights looked cool. I liked the ability of them to regenerate after they were like attacked with the not correct weapons,
mhm,
and then have them like creepily reform. I liked the chains coming out
mhm,
of the barrows, which was awesome. I liked the hands kind of creepily coming out and the
mhm,
glowing eyes in the
mhm.
dark.
Everything
All of
you're
those things I liked. Yeah, it's just I think it to me it all comes down to like just poor writing of
yes.
Galadriel.
Yeah,
And
no, we started our pre-recording conversation with they should combine Galadriel and Elrond into one character. And
or they should have, I think in season 2, and one thing that I hope they do, continue to move away from Galadriel as our series protagonist
yes,
that she was in season 1,
yes.
and give me more Elrond as protagonist. He's
Yeah.
the one that is afraid of the rings.
Mhm.
He's the one that doesn't trust them. He's the one making wise decisions amongst all of these apparently wise elves. So if the show continues to make that adjustment away from Galadriel and into Elrond, I will be very, very happy.
I agree with that. And I should say it's nothing to do with the fact that Galadriel is the female character that they're kind of trying to turn into an action hero. It's to do with the way that is happening. And that it also is inconsistent with her character in the book. What would have heightened this scene for me is a few things. One, they missed an opportunity to they, it would have been very easy to say that these were ancient kings of men who worshipped the Morgoth and the Dark Lord, right, during the First Age or something like that. So then they don't need to. Do they say something in this scene about somebody woke them up or something like that? Right?
They
Like,
basically say Sauron's evil
yeah, but
has like caused them to.
yeah, I thought that they could have done that a little bit better because as it is right now, it is it's the exact same idea, and they even to the point where they call it the Barrow. Oh, and this is another complaint, just a visual complaint. Like the Barrow Downs themselves were not that impressive, right? It was just a couple of mounds in the woods.
Mhm.
In the book, the Barrow Downs are a large geographic area. There's significant elevation. Like they're actually impressive. And I think Tolkien was basing these on like some pretty impressive like Neolithic monuments in England and Ireland and
Scotland. Yeah.
Scotland. Like, and they and like a king's burial, especially in the kind of Tolkien, Northern European, Anglo-Saxon, like it would have been more impressive even 1,000 years later than a couple of holes in the ground. So there was that, and again, like they spared no expense with the CGI. It looked phenomenal, and I agree with you. Like the the glowing eyes, them reforming after coming into like being attacked, that was all great. But just amp up the setting just a little bit. Because as it was, like, why did they have to walk through those stones? They couldn't have just detoured around it slightly. Like they didn't establish any of the constraint. They didn't do enough to establish the constraints of why those elves were in that location. Like they said, oh, we have to pass through this area, but it seemed like all of the Barrow Downs were right there. Would just walk a little bit a ways away. And so there's that. The Elrond solution to the problem just comes out of nowhere.
I disagree.
You
There's a
know?
moment where when the fighting is happening, they clearly show Elrond like stopping, looking around and thinking. And then they cut back to him later after more failed attacks. And then he goes, "Come with me." And then comes up with his
Right. No,
idea.
no, I get that. I understand. I his recognition of the problem was fine, but there was no setup for him solving it.
I don't get what you mean by that.
So the in the book, the Barrow Downs scene, prior to the hobbits going into the Barrow Downs and being basically kidnapped and they're about to be murdered and sacrificed by the Barrow Wight, Tom Bombadil teaches them a song. And so then the way that they are rescued is set up because they have this way to summon Tom Bombadil who can save them from the Barrow Wight, basically. I think it would have been better if we had gotten some hint about, like, they obviously knew what this place was and who was buried here. And so there could have been just one little line or something that set up Elrond's familiarity with it. That would have explained how he was able to recognize you needed to get the weapon. It's just little things like, I get it.
I think it's a huge nitpick personally, because we've already established he's a wise old elf. So, I mean, to me, it's a moment where he just goes, "Oh shit, I remember this from a story I read or a scroll that I read that we need to use the weapons they were buried with to defeat them."
Yeah.
So I don't know. It doesn't really bother me all that much.
Okay. Again, it's nitpicky stuff. And then my other issue with this scene is and this crops up again in Galadriel's fight with the orcs. It's like the Barrow Wights either outnumbered or had even numbers with them, and they were obviously hostile. So why were they taking their time and not just like rushing at these elves and completely destroying them? Right? So it just, that did make any sense, because at several points they're like, oh, be still or steal your arrows, or like stay here, right? Like, if the elves are just standing there and up until Elrond runs and grabs those other weapons, why are the Barrow Wights just not going in? They can obviously just, they fucked up that first elf. They dragged him underground and sucked his blood out. Yeah, right. Like, they didn't have any issue with the other two messengers who they attacked during the daytime, if we're supposed to think that the daytime versus nighttime does anything. But like, they had this group of elves surrounded. They were impervious to their weapons for the time being. Why were there not more casualties? Anyway, that's a small thing. But if you're going to go out of your way to demonstrate how scary and impressive these things are, then they should act like that, or there should be, or you don't have to write it like that. Like, you only needed one Barrow Wight to menace the four hobbits. If you had just 2 or 3 Barrow Wights that were invincible to their weapons, it would be just as menacing as 6 or more, most of whom are just standing in the background going, attacking them one at a time and seemingly not very hard. Anyway, little things like that. It's just fight choreography stuff, basically.
Then we have Galadriel later, who basically sacrifices herself for no reason to hold off for the other elves.
That was even worse.
Yeah, because she saves the one, and we've already established that the elves basically ran from Linden all the way to Eregion. And you're telling me that a small band of like 10 orcs, they can't just outrun? Like, that didn't make any sense to me, why she had to sacrifice herself like that.
It was completely.
But then the fight scene itself, I would imagine you hated. So,
well, I just went off on other issues I had. What did you think of that fight scene? I will certainly come in if there's anything that you.
No, I just thought it was pointless. Like,
it was certainly pointless.
If those group of orcs is right there, just leave.
Yeah, no, if
run away.
They weren't like a last stand, I'll buy you time scene would make sense if, for instance, they were on the bridge.
Or if that guy with the arrow was still mortally wounded and they needed to like slowly hobble him away.
Yes.
But when you heal him and the arrow just pops out and he can just like get up and be fine, then when I first watched it, I was like, okay, yeah, there's an injured elf. She's trying to make sure that they have time to get away. But then I remembered in my second watch that she just healed him. And I was like, well, then why the fuck did she go with them? Like,
yes. And also, like, why did the messengers ride horses and the 5 of these people didn't?
And they're just running. Yeah.
They're just running. Like, if they had, here's an idea, give them horses and then take their horses away through an ambush or through the fight with the Barrow Wights, so that they are seemingly a little bit more vulnerable. Because as it was, the 4 of them escaped just as easily as the 5 of them could have if they had just been a little sneakier. Like, and And it was a completely pointless fight. It just and then all of the components of the fight made absolutely zero sense. And this is where like they are going out of their way to this scene, they were going out of their way to make her look cool, but it comes off dumb. The fire arrows. Normal arrows don't just catch on fire when you pass them over a torch, and then they don't explode and catch
Pedantic Sam.
I'm just like, you don't need
I know,
to
I'm just
do
saying,
this.
it could be a kerosene lamp. We don't know that.
It was
No
just really
response.
no, it's just like, yeah,
Just
it could be a kerosene lamp, but it's like she's so good at fighting up until she's not.
yeah.
Right? Like that's the thing. It's like, oh, if you're so good that you can steal a lantern, throw it in the air, and then shoot it with an arrow before it lands, and it happens to catch three dudes on fire, but you can't shoot an arrow at Adar fast enough to avoid him grabbing it. Like that didn't make any sense. There's one scene where she like jumps on a horse that just happens to be there, and it's not the horse that the orcs were hunting. It's a different horse because it has a saddle, and it was like somebody rode it there. Maybe Adar, it unclear. But she like jumps on an orc who's on their hands and knees while another orc is like standing next to the horse. She was so completely outnumbered. They already had demonstrated that the orcs had bows and arrows, and nobody was shooting arrows at her, and they were all attacking her one at a time. It was just the most stereotypical dumb action sequence that just ended up with her getting captured. So it was a pointless quote unquote sacrifice. It was poorly executed, and they didn't have to write it that way. They could have done it differently. There could have been like, if you really needed to buy somebody time, yes, keep him injured, or put it on, make it make sense geographically, and put a narrow path or a bridge or something, some element, some sort of ticking clock where they have to escape now, and if they don't, they're all damned. But as it was poorly set up. So really didn't like that scene.
We also have a strong feeling that the first 4 episodes of the show so far should have and could have been the entire series, or at least the second season. We feel like everything has just kind of gotten smushed into the first 4 episodes of this season. Season 1 is kind of pointless at this point and not very necessary. And everything we've gotten in season 2, we kind of like, especially with episode 4, but we both wanted it to be way more fleshed out. And the only way to do that is to extend the amount of time that we are in the show. So talking about the orcs being in Eregion brings me back to another issue with the Ents quick before we move on to our last topic here. But the Ents are in the Southlands because that army of orcs by Adar has left the Southlands in Mordor and has marched all the way from Mordor to Eregion, which is pretty much the entire journey of the characters of the Lord of the Rings over the 3 books. So it doesn't make any sense to me, their timelines. And across the entire spectrum of the show, things happen way too quickly. And that's where we're saying the first 4 episodes feel like they should have been the entire second season. Because how you and I were getting into the nitty gritty on how far these elves actually ran to go from Linden to Eregion and then back to Linden. And then we were trying to figure out how fast they could have run and how long they would have been running. And we're not going to bore you with all of that information, but regardless, it takes me out of it when I have to constantly ask the question, how did they get there so fast? How did an entire army march from Mordor to Eregion in the same time it took these elves to march from Linden to Eregion? It makes no sense. And I get so confused as to what is happening where and when. And then when you try to piece together like a coherent timeline, it just makes me frustrated at the show. because
Yeah.
it's just lazy.
It's lazy, and I think they are going to go out of they are going out of their way to avoid discussion of timeline, because there's a line in this episode which, when Arondir asks one of the Ents, when did this happen, i.e., when did this army of orcs walk through, and she completely ignores the question and just starts freaking out about the destruction of the trees. And it's like they're not going to tell us. But yes, we have an entire army crossing the continent at the same time as a small group of people is not even traversing that, like the larger distance between Linden and Eregion, just like meeting them halfway between Linden and Eregion. You know, how long has Isildur been in that spider? How long was he in that spider cave? How long did he spend between the spider cave getting to Pelargir? Like that, how much, going
Yeah,
back
because the first time we see Isildur is in episode 3.
yeah. And I get it that the episodes, everything that happens in the episodes is not chronological, but is there a timeline somewhere that makes sense? I don't think there is.
Especially when you look at the events that are happening, seemingly, because all of the other plot lines, characters eventually interact with each other from the other plot lines. So then we have the situation with Hallbrand when he's still in his human form, leaving Mordor and then going to Eregion. You have instances where you can be like, okay, he left here in this plot line and got here in this plot line. And you can kind of piece together like when things are happening, but then it still doesn't make sense because you have, like with this instance with the orc army leaving Mordor, and then all of a sudden popping up in another plot line, but then it doesn't match like Hallbrand leaving and Isildur. How long was he alone, and how long did it take them to go from Mordor to Pelargir, which is south of Gondor, and all of these other things? So, if the orc army left shortly after Hallbrand left Mordor to then go to Eregion, you would assume that the Ents and like that scene with Arondir and all of that would have happened. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well,
and I'm trying in my brain, I'm trying to piece it together, but I can't.
I'm not going to be able to pull off the full quote, but I'm going to bring up that scene from Austin Powers 2 when he travels in time. And I think is it Michael York is the actor who plays the Basil Exposition, looks straight at the camera and tells the audience not to think about time travel too much. Like we basically should just like we should stop thinking about timelines. As annoying as it is, they don't have an answer that makes sense. It will not make sense on the screen. We should try to shut off that part of our brains because it's going to be fruitless. I will say, in the Ent confrontation scene, this is one of those things where I think we've talked about it before. I think in the last episode where I described it as the show being a mile wide and an inch deep, where you have one scene with Ents that lasts just a few minutes. And it's very intriguing because we like Ents. Ents are interesting. They're powerful. They are old. They occupy an interesting place in the world of Tolkien. And what do these Ents do exactly? Right? Like, Isildur was not in mortal danger from Estrid because Arondir was right there with the bow and arrow. So they didn't save Isildur. And by all rights, Estrid should be dead. She was smashed by an Ent, and then hit a rock. She would be dead. Or
who have the Ents who have the power to like break boulders and shit.
Yeah, I mean, they showed earlier in this episode, like that guy's arm had been completely ripped off his body by an Ent. And these Ents obviously didn't have any problem killing some and rounding up the other wild men. Estrid would be dead or completely in like every bone in her body broken and would be dying. That's aside. But then they have this like agreement with Arondir that no one will harm the forest. Like Arondir is not in a position to enforce that. He's leaving now. And and orcs aren't the only people that chop down trees. Like the humans do it too, and they need the wood. Like they don't have the luxury of elves who can like cultivate trees and work with the living wood. Like humans need to chop trees down in order to make fires and build their homes and stuff. Like he can't, it's just a stupid thing to do. You don't need to set it up like that. You've already mentioned the whole Theo being the Lord of Pelargir. But then you know what they was a really a huge missed opportunity in this episode was any sort of conversation between Theo and the wild men when they're prisoners together. Like that would have been such an opportunity to tell us more about Theo, to tell us more about these wild men. Like, and then we get the scene at the end when Hagen and Estrid are reconnected, and it really humanizes both of them. And it's very frustrating because I want to know more about these people and the dynamics and what's happening, and I want these characters to grow. But instead, it seems like we go from cool scene to cool scene to cool scene. And yeah, the cool scenes are good, and generally I think we're on the upswing here, but there's so many missed opportunities.
Finally, let's tackle Rune.
Yeah, and I know where we can get the time to do it.
So with Rune, I think the last things we have to talk about here are the hobbits, the halflings, the Harfoots, and the Stewars. We do learn in this episode that the Harfoots are descendants of the Stewars because Sadok Burrows is a descendant of a Barrow who left the Stewars a long time ago looking for basically their Suzat,
the Quetzalcoatl Cataract,
their haven, which we're assuming is Hobbiton.
Or like the Shire generally.
Yeah, somewhere in the Shire. This whole plot line I just don't need.
No,
it just doesn't make any sense. Why include it? I would have rather them have spent the time in the Stewart little village and that really stupid love connection between the one Stewart and Poppy.
Yeah, Nobody or Merrimack, I believe is his real name. Yeah, I wanted to vomit. That was why are you doing that? It's just another one of those things. Like,
why?
So you're gonna give us screen because I know they don't have the balls to like do anything with it significant. Like, actually, is Poppy gonna like marry him and stay there? Is that how they're gonna get her off the
maybe, but she's only been there for a day.
And they told her to leave.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I would have much rather have had, don't give me all this bullshit with the Stewards. Give me a more expanded Pelargir.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much stuff they could have done and not wasted my time.
Yeah. I think the specific thing that we both didn't like was the Godrim confronting the Stewards at the end of the episode, where they like walk in and they slap the leader of the Stewards. What's her name? They slap her to the ground, and then like one of them offers to help her up, and then they threaten them if they threaten the Stewards if they don't turn over the Harfoots. And the Godrim say Harfoot, which how would they know what those halflings are called if it's like a splinter group that doesn't reside there? That doesn't make any sense to me, but either way. And then they leave. They if they're supposed to be so intimidating and they are ready to commit violence, why did they not do anything when they went there? Why did they not smash some pots and threaten some children and maybe kill anybody who got in their way? And they could have just found Poppy and Nori right then and there instead of, and again, they're dragging things out. And it doesn't make sense based on the reality of that situation where they had weapons, they have size, they have the willingness to inflict violence. People who are like that would have just done it then and there. Anyway.
That was episode 4, everybody. I swear we liked it.
Yeah, I know. It's like it was cool. Like there were parts of it. There were
maybe that's why we shat on it more this episode, because we did like it, but the things that are inherently poor about the show just made us even more frustrated because we liked it.
I think I've definitely shifted from, oh, I don't like it and this is why, to, oh, I like this and these are the things that are,
this is what pisses me off.
This is what's holding it back at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Little things irritate me, but a lot is being held back. But I have to say, I mean, forecast to episode 5, which we both watched, like things are
good.
Are getting better. Episode 4 is probably the best episode so far of the entire show. And then episode 5 came out and surpassed it. And I think, is episode 6 out as we're recording?
It's out right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And I think,
I'm planning on watching it tonight.
yeah.
So
Okay.
I'll report back via text. But this was episode 93 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We covered season 2, episode 4 of Rings of Power. You can follow us on Facebook at Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. You can send us email at elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. Sorry, I just had a burp. You can join our Facebook group where we try to interact with people. That is the Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things podcast. I believe that's it.
That's it, everybody. We'll see
you can listen to us everywhere where you normally listen to podcasts.
See you next episode.